Welcome to Affinity, a Fin Partners podcast where we educate and explore the impact of transformative marketing communications. My name is Aleksandra King. On today's episode, join us as we delve into how brands connect with their audiences, how ideas are sparked, and how innovative storytelling earns attention and drives results. Welcome to the Affinity podcast. Just for our audience, can you tell us a little bit about your roles in your companies that you work for?
Sure. Well, I'll start. So my name is Marc Granville. I am a Senior Director at the International Capital Market Association, and I'm the head of the education and training team there. So I've been with ICMA for about 5 years now. Previous to this, I've been in education for maybe 20 years. Previous to this, I was at London Business School, and previous to that in different places. That's me.
So my name's Elliott King. I'm a managing partner at Fin Partners. I head up our integrated marketing division, so I oversee the divisions that look at digital marketing, tactics, SEO, social media, creative design development, and so on and so forth.
Okay, so let's just go back to you, Marc.
Sure.
ICMA. Tell us a little bit about what ICMA does and what its primary objectives are.
We are a not-for-profit trade association for the international bond markets. Okay, so a lot of people sort of see capital markets and a little bit mystified about what this all means. Basically, we're a group that facilitates engagement between all participants in the bond markets. So whether you are someone who issues the bonds, whether you're an intermediary, whether you're an investor, or whether you're a market infrastructure provider. So we sort of create this environment to facilitate market interaction, so by having people come together and work together and talk together, this really produces a more coherent market. We do a number of other things. So for example, we establish market standards and best practices. We are quite heavily involved in regulatory engagement. So we work with regulators to try and impact or have an impact on, regulatory policies. We very much in terms of creating a market platform by committees, through forums, through working groups, and provide our members with an opportunity to have an impact on the market, so how that sort of evolves. And I think then finally we provide a platform for events and for networking and for what I do, which is training.
Why then is training specifically considered valuable in the context of these financial markets?
I think training is incredibly important. I think in any industry, right, and particularly in something as heavily regulated and as the financial services industry. Mm-hmm. So I think training does a few things. In the first instance, it promotes technical skills. So in our industry, the instruments that were used are sometimes quite complex, right? They're complicated, and people need to learn how they're structured and how they're used and what the risks are and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of the sort of technical skills that training builds around the instruments in the market itself. In the second instance, I think that people need to keep up to date with the latest developments. The markets are incredibly fast evolving. They evolve very quickly, and when you look at things like the impact of technology or the impact of sustainability and sustainable finance markets, these things really move quickly, so people need to keep up to date with those. I think in the third instance, it's really, really important to ensure that for a heavily regulated industry like financial services, capital markets, people understand the regulation. So we work very, very closely with different banks, and I'm thinking here, there's a relationship we've had with a number of Dutch banks over the years, where every year they will send quite a few people on our training courses to learn about particular regulation, which has a huge impact on the investment services. And then I think finally, training is really, really important for your career, for networking, right? So it helps, just like ICMA helps create an environment for a cohesive market so a collaborative market. I think training does the same thing in terms of the networking. You meet people, you see opportunities, and go from there.
So would you then say that training helps these markets run smoothly? Is that the primary goal?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the key things in the financial markets is decision making by participants, right? You really want people to make informed decisions based on analysis. You don't want people basing their decisions on speculation, right? And I think training is really, really helpful there. I think training helps promote, or it helps compliance with the regulatory sort of regimes. It really promotes ethical behaviour in the markets, and I think that's a really, really important thing. And I think ultimately it builds trust, right? People want to know that in our markets, where everybody's money is, right, when it comes down to it, whether it's your pension or whether it's your insurance provider or whatever it is, people want to be able to trust people who handle that money. And I think that we play a huge role in building the capacity of the people who do that. So it's an important thing.
Yeah, no, it sounds like you're playing a huge role. But then do you have any competition,
Oh,
ICMA?
do we have? Yes, absolutely.
You do?
It's a fierce. Competition is fierce.
Is it fierce?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think so, our industry is, the bond markets, the international bond markets are valued in their trillions, right? These are not small. It's not a small industry. This is a really, really big industry. And so I think that there is a recognition that training is incredibly important, and therefore lots of people want to provide that training. So we have competition from everything from business schools. So, a lot of people have heard about the expansion of business skills over the years. Universities putting a lot of money into this. They provide a lot of training in this area. Private training institutions train, so there's a lot of training. But I think we are very, very fortunate that we have been delivering training for almost 50 years now. So I think ICMA has been around going on 60 years. We've done training for most of that time. And so I think we've built a reputation over those years. We've established a really great core group of clients. And I think that people trust us to help build capacity within their organizations.
Okay, so you've touched on this a little bit, besides the competition that
Sure.
you've got. What are the challenges do you face in trying to identify and reach the right people for these training programs?
We operate, it's interesting, you talk about financial services, and it's a huge, huge market. But the capital markets, the bond markets, are actually quite niche. We really do have quite a niche audience. And so trying to identify the right people is really challenging. I think that's one key challenge. So you want to find the right people to become aware. And so the second thing I think is awareness, right? How do you create awareness within your niche group of people within this industry? And that's a huge challenge.
Okay, so how have you been, ICMA, how have ICMA been successful so far in finding the right students?
I think we have been successful in the first instance through the slow acquisition of a really great group of core clients, mostly our members, but other non-members as well, and so through word of mouth and this type of thing. So we work with a lot of commercial banks, investment banks, central banks, multilateral development banks, these type of things. So we've been very, very lucky there to work well within our constituency. And then, so from there, we've created a database, and that database keeps on growing. So I think there's that's helped. But I think also, since I've been around in the last 5 years or so, digital marketing and working with digital, marketing agencies has been a really critical way for us to get out to that wider audience.
Would you say that that's the way that ICMA has been successful in standing out from this huge competitive field?
Yeah, I think so. I think we've been very fortunate that we have worked with a number of great organisations, and that's done us really, really well. And I think that as long as we continue to evolve and to and avoid becoming too insular, right? Avoid becoming too inward looking. So working with, agencies like Fin have been great for us because it enables us to be far more outward looking.
Yeah, so I wanted to bring you in, Elliott. So why is it important for ICMA to be working with an agency like Fin Partners?
Well, I think an agency like Fin Partners can bring the sort of tactical expertise and the industry know-how to deliver some of the sort of marketing strategies that would work for an organisation like ICMA. However, I think the most important thing for ICMA or organisations similar to ICMA is that you're really clear about a few things. So first of all, the market that you're going after, the competition, for that market, so the competition that are competing for those same prospects that you're looking to engage, and also your own positioning. So the USPs, and we've heard Marc talk really coherently about all of those things in this introduction piece. So I think it's absolutely brilliant that you've recognised that ICMA and the decades of experience that you have, the relationships that you have with the players in this market, those are two things that will stand you out certainly from many of your competitors. And when you do go to market with a strategy, whether it's digital marketing or awareness marketing, whatever it is, it's really important that you're clear that you what are your USPs and you bring them front and center to your messaging, because those are the things that will really allow you to cut through. And then the final thing to say is when you do have a really niche audience of the type that we're talking about here, then it's about picking the right tools and tactics that will enable you to reach that specific audience. And there are social media profiles out there, social media platforms out there like LinkedIn, for example, where you can be super targeted based on someone's job title or the place where someone works. And there are other platforms, including programmatic advertising, that allow you to be similarly targeted when you're going after really niche audiences.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the evolution of ICMA's strategy, the marketing strategy with Fin as a partner. How did that sort of move along? Because you must have started somewhere from a base, and how did that evolve?
Well, so when I joined ICMA, I think the training department, the training function was quite different. So we traditionally had worked with different partners, and ICMA were almost really just the marketing side of things. And so there was a very, very small team. The marketing was very member-centric. There was no external engagement, right? So it really was a couple of people within the association going out to different trade events and traveling and talking to members and so on and so forth. And I think that, so one of my priorities when I joined was, after I'd sort of kind of got a feel for what it was, and we were looking to consolidate and saw a more of a standalone thing, I thought it was really, really important to work with externals, because I think the danger is, whilst marketing internally is great, so we're very lucky to have a great database. We do quite a lot of travel. We work in a global industry, so we do travel a lot to attend meetings, to attend trade events, these type of things. I think you risk becoming quite inward looking and insular, and you risk missing out on a lot of stuff, right? And especially I think as social media evolves, the digital landscape evolves, technology evolves, I know by continually following traditional sort of marketing patterns, I think you risk a lot, right? So for us, it was one, recognizing we needed external help, and then two, going out and saying, okay, well, who's the best person, or who's the best group to take on? And so, we went through a procurement process, a short list, and so on and so forth, and we chose Fin. And I think the reason that we chose Fin, one, we got on pretty well, I think, at the start. He's a good guy to have a beer with, which is always right, which is always nice. Seriously, really, I mean, like this relationship, right? It's really important. But I think also the thing that I liked that was Mintwist and is now Fin is that it was very much, it's not a one string bow. Right, there was they have a lot of different angles. So yes, they can do digital marketing, they can go, PPC campaigns or Google search or this type of thing, so they can focus on that. But then they've also got, you've got the PR angle, you've got the SEO angle, you've got all these different types of things that are really, really useful. Now, we don't use them all, but obviously knowing that they're there and knowing that we're working with an agency that has a very holistic approach, with a definite pedigree background was really useful.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting hearing you talk earlier on about training and training in the context of the financial sector and the capital markets. You're actually making an investment in developing your own internal business processes, according to best practices. And in your industry, things are changing really rapidly. And it's very, very similar in marketing. And it's really nice to hear you talk about the fact that it's a number of different tactics, and it's about how you pull these tactics together. And obviously, it's really crucial that you've got the right internal resources and the will and the desire and the track record to go out and build actual real world connections. And so I think the relationship that Finn have been lucky enough to have with ICMA over many years has really been a marriage of all of these things, and through the personal relationship that Marc and I have been able to develop, we've been able to pull these resources together and build out an infrastructure that really works. And to carry the analogy on, I feel like investment in marketing or investment in training or business processes, whether it's marketing or your financial processes, they're actually underpinning business processes that sit inside an organization. And it's a bit like if you're going to build a city, right? There's a way to build buildings so they don't fall down. There's a way to build roads and a road infrastructure and a communications infrastructure that works efficiently. There's a way to build utilities and make sure the grid is working efficiently. And actually you need experts in all of these areas to pull all of these things together. So working with partners in the right way at the right times, I think is fundamental in both ways.
Yeah, no, look, I agree. And that is a fantastic analogy for the financial markets. That's very much the approach that ICMA takes, right? And I could not think of a better analogy for that. And it's all about capacities, building that capacity, right? So we do it as an association in terms of the wider kind of community, in terms of issuance, in terms of investing, in terms of procedure, all this sort of stuff. And we do it in training because ultimately, whilst all of these processes are incredibly important to the markets, people drive these processes, right? And so you need to have the capacity in these people to be able to do it. And I think, that was well done, mate. That was nice.
Okay, so how has ICMA shifted from a bottom of the funnel conversion approach to a more full funnel marketing strategy?
Yeah, that's a good question. So as I say, when we started, we were very much focused, and I'm not sure. I'm going to guess that your audience is familiar with this funnel, the marketing funnel, right? So for those who may not be, and I'm thinking potentially some people from my industry, a marketing funnel approach is a fairly simple concept, right? You have when you're trying to sell someone something, you have a funnel, right? So if you want to pour water into a bottle, you go through a funnel. And at the top of that funnel, we call that the awareness part, right? So making people aware of who you are. And then once they're aware of who you are, they go into the middle part of the funnel, which is the consideration, right? So, okay, well, we know who you are. Let's think about, should we use you, should we not? And then at the bottom of the funnel, it's conversion, right? So it's like, okay, great. We know who you are. We've thought about it, and yes, we're going to use your service. And so this is this conversion. And so ICMA was very much focused when I started on the conversion part, right at the bottom of the funnel. How can we've got this market, right? We've been around for a long time. We've got a captured market. How do we get more people to train with us? And so it's okay. Well, how do we focus on this conversion, which we did, I think, and Elliott probably can talk a lot more coherently about it than I can. But the point was that I think if you then want to say, okay, well, great, we're kind of maximizing the conversion. We're doing pretty well with this type of marketing. How do we actually get more people to learn about us, right? So if we want to get, ultimately, that's awareness building. And so we're looking at different campaigns. So we do, obviously, notwithstanding the internal stuff that we do, as I mentioned before, database and travel and all that sort of stuff, we were looking at digital marketing. And so we're saying, well, we started with kind of PPC campaigns, Google search, putting in, a lot of budget into external media. But then it was like, okay, well, that's great for the lower end. How do we attract the top end of this funnel? And so it's a journey. In the first instance, we haven't cracked this, but we're starting with this idea actually of content creation, right? So really being able to create content around our brand and then position that content on different platforms, whether that be social media, whether it be whatever it is. And so we're actually doing a vlog campaign ourselves. But I think, Elliott, you can probably talk a bit more coherently about the actual methodology behind that.
Well, I think you've done a fantastic job of illustrating the way that the funnel works, and to push another analogy, I would say it's like at the top of the funnel you're planting seeds, right, and at the bottom of the funnel you're harvesting the fruit, and the time it takes for that seed to turn into that ripe fruit depends on a few things. It depends on the sort of sector that you're working in and the period of time that a decision, a buying decision would take, but it's also very much about how you nurture those seeds. And I think by developing high quality content, particularly in your type of industry where what you're selling is fairly complex, is fairly high value, and being able to demonstrate the knowledge that you have within your organization, which is obviously really significant, through a format that's similar to this, frankly, that can be shared in video or in audio format, and hopefully it's of interest to your prospects. And this is exactly the type of content that allows you to nurture that audience. Well, first of all, you can use this content to create awareness, but then to nurture them as hopefully those prospects become engaged and interested in what you're doing. And then when they're ready to buy or to at least consider buying, then you're in the thoughts of those prospects, and you're in the game, really.
So how do you measure success then? What metrics does ICMA use to measure these strategies and whether they're working?
Yeah, good question. I mean, ultimately your success is bums on seats, as we like to say, right? If we're running training courses and we've got full classrooms or full virtual classrooms or lots of people signing up for online courses, then that's the ultimate metric. But I think there's obviously far more sophisticated ones than that. It's an interesting one. So, we do use metrics like open rates, click-through rates, bounce rates, session times, these types of digital metrics that we can tell. We want to drive people ultimately to our website to look at our services, the services that we provide. And the longer, the more people who are driven to that website through our marketing campaigns, the longer they stay on that website, the more pages they visit, all this sort of stuff, right? That's the good metrics to have. But I think it also illustrates another point because, it depends on what channels you use. Right. So we started with a broad range of channels. I think when we first started working with MintTwist, we worked with, we use Facebook, we use Instagram, we use LinkedIn, we use Google Search, we use other things. And what we were finding was that whilst the metrics were quite often very good in one respect in channels like Facebook, right? So in terms of the impressions that we were making, the number of impressions we were making were fantastic. Getting millions of people seeing your stuff. But what we were noticing was that despite some of the metrics being very, very good, the ultimate metric, i.e., are these people ultimately going to come and attend one of your courses, there was a bit of a disconnect, right? So the conversion ratio was incredibly low. And so we're thinking, okay, well, so it gets you thinking about, well, what channels are really more effective? So we ditched Facebook, for example. So for us, it wasn't that great, and we sort of continually refine. I think we continue to refine those channels to make sure that the metrics that we're using are positive, which is, and we always want to see, improving metrics, but also relevant, right? So it has to drive bums on seats, which essentially it drives revenue.
I think that's absolutely right, and it's important to understand that when you're approaching, in this case, we're talking about a digital advertising strategy that's focused on the bottom of the funnel, so converting clients, then you do want to look at all of these metrics so that you can look at the individual channels and the individual ads and ad groups within those channels and have an objective view about whether they're working or not. But as Marc is sort of quite rightly saying, what we're really interested in is how all of these channels are working together, and then collectively, what is the conversion rates? How many people are actually signing up for our training courses? And when you're working with a specialist agency like ours, what you're actually paying for is being able to look down at that low level detail and make an intelligent interpretation about how well it's working. And just really on a simplistic level, there's sort of three aspects that those specialists would be looking at. One is the targeting. So how are we targeting those personas that we're going after? And there's all sorts of ways that are channel specific that you can do that. You know, I've spoken about job function, demographic, usage type, etc. But there's also the message. So that actually the visual and the words and the format of that ad and the way that that's presented to those prospects. And then obviously the channel and the amount of spend that are put into it. So it's really important that you don't jump to conclusions too quickly, because it might be that tweaking one of those three factors or a sub-factor within those three groups might actually make an improvement to that channel. So you don't want to bin things too quickly. Having said that, when you've made an objective decision about a channel and you want to divert spend, then it's about how much spend do you divert and where do you divert it to. And it's this continuous process of optimization that you need to go through in order to optimize the performance of a marketing strategy. I'll just say one more thing. Particularly when we talk about digital advertising, this bottom of the funnel conversion focused stuff, it is all about return on investment. Because ultimately, if we're spending more than the profit we're earning from in this case, training we're selling, then obviously it doesn't make sense. We want to be making a return on investment. And it's very much like investing in the stock market. If you're going to make an investment across a portfolio of shares, over time you want to see a net profit return back to you. And in the ad worlds, there's this term called ROAS, which is return on ad spend. And ultimately, when we're talking about performance marketing, that's the ultimate KPI that we want to measure. And all of these things, open rate, click-through rate, and cost per click, we want them ultimately to ladder up to a return on ad spend. In the case of Marc and ICMA, because we've been fortunate enough to work with them over a period of time, we're quite close to being able to do that. So we can have a good go at mapping back the actual sign-ups back to the actual ad spend and all of those KPIs in between, and hopefully have an objective view about whether it's working and how well it's working.
Yeah, absolutely. Organizations like ours, clients, right, who do not have internal marketing teams, don't have the in-house expertise to be able to understand, okay, great, we've got very, very basic metrics, but ultimately we're looking for this ROAS, right, the return on ad spend. We don't necessarily have the insights to be able to analyze how to do that most effectively. And I think especially when we're moving from a conversion-based campaign, right? So where the conversion rates, where it's a little bit simpler, right? Okay, we're going to spend X, we're driving this directly to this page where people are going to register. If that many people do it, then it's a fairly easy conversion thing. When you're moving up to awareness, right, that's when it becomes a lot more complicated. And I think that's where the value of working with an agency that has the experience in this is really, really valuable.
You can do a whole episode talking about conversion and tracking and reporting, and actually we have done that. But the truth is that the investment in awareness marketing invariably becomes a bit more long term.
Yeah.
Having said that, there are ways and means to track the full funnel, and as I said, there is another episode about that. But look, it's a continuous journey, because as we've said, in your sector and in the marketing sector, there's so many moving parts and pieces. But what we want to do is at least have enough insight to know that we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then experimenting along the way, can be really effective and also really fun.
Yeah.
It is a continuous journey, and you've done really well actually looking at what needed to be changed, sort of evolving with how technology's been moving along, making adjustments where you needed to make them. Then in the present, Elliott, you and your team tracking everything that you possibly can, analyzing that data. So that's been great. But then what about the future? What future trends do you then see, financial markets and sustainable finance and training?
It's a good question, and this is something that as an association we're always looking at. I think the association, one of the key things that we do, and I didn't really mention it earlier, but we have been instrumental in promoting sustainable finance, for example. So, and also, really championing the technology, the impact of technology, and trying to be front and center in that space. I think, look, as sustainable, when they talk about sustainable finance, you are now talking, I think the latest figures we've heard, cumulative sustainable debt is now around 5 trillion, right? This is now a mainstream.
Yeah.
This is not a niche market anymore, right? This is a mainstream market.
Yeah.
And so I think as financial instruments, right, become mainstreamed, then things change. So we talk quite often, we make a distinction between developed markets. So, with really markets, what we're talking about is markets with really, really quite sophisticated financial infrastructures, as opposed to emerging markets, for example, or frontier markets. So in that way, I think training will change. Developed markets will care less about learning about these instruments and more about, I think, the decisions that go around. So it's really, I think one of the big trends is going to be in training is going to be new questions are going to be raised about financial services overall. Right, so it's no longer about, well, okay, how do we raise finance for this particular environmental project? It's more about how are all of our investments really making an impact on climate change, right? And I think this is going to be integrated a lot more into training, which I think is a really, really positive thing. I think the other trend will be the increased impact of technology. Technology is having a huge impact.
Yeah, I wanted to ask how is it having this impact?
Yeah, on the markets. I mean, I think in terms of driving efficiency, so AI in particular is having a huge impact on that. Transparency, I think it's really having a big impact on that. And I think also things like in terms of the regulatory space, compliance and so on and so forth. So technology is having a massive impact on all elements of the financial markets at the moment, capital markets in particular. So these I don't have a crystal ball, but I think these things do definitely have an impact on training, in as much as training, we've spoken earlier that, one of the key things about training is to learn about the technical side of the business, learn about the updates, learn about the regulatory compliance environment, right? And so as that evolves, obviously the training's going to evolve as well.
I mean, I imagine that all of these drivers of change just significantly increase the requirement for training, because as you said earlier, at the end of the day, you might have all of this technology, but until we get to a world where literally you're pressing the button and the AI is just running the whole show, then you're going to need some humans who understand what's going on and who are making these decisions.
Absolutely. I mean, because look, when it boils down to it, like any other industry, the financial markets it's a human industry, right? They're staffed by people, and yes, those people are going to be using more advanced tools in the future that will help them do their jobs. Presumably, they will still have jobs, right? I don't know. I think about it like Industrial Revolution, right? You go from a bunch of people who are hand sewing cloth to using machines to create them and manufacture them on a much bigger scale. I think it's essentially the same kind of concept with technology and the financial markets. You're still going to have people working in the markets, but the tools at their disposal will enable them to do their job, hopefully more efficiently. Hopefully it will have an impact on risk management. Hopefully there'll be more transparency, right? And so ultimately it becomes very, very beneficial.
Okay, so let's use that Industrial Revolution example. So how then is ICMA's work contributing to the broader financial ecosystem and changing that whole landscape?
We'd probably come back in the first instance to what I was saying, facilitating market interaction, establishing best practice, working with the regulators to make sure that policies are suitable, providing the platform for our members to have an impact, all of these things. So I think that's important. I think there's a couple of ways in particular. I think sustainable finance, we have so ICMA is the secretariat of what we call the principles, and without wanting to get too technical on this thing, so the principles are essentially frameworks, and frameworks to determine whether or not an instrument can be called a particular thing, like a green bond or a social bond or something like that, right? So if an organization wants to finance something, then they can use this particular instrument and they can finance a particular project, an environmental project, a social project, or whatever it is. So ICMA have always been at the forefront of that, and I think that really we've helped to establish the financial sector's involvement in combating climate change. So we've really been quite instrumental in that space, and I think just helping to introduce sustainability or promote sustainability since the principles were established. So I think sustainable finance is a huge way we've been involved. Another one is in the repo market. So again, repo is quite a particular instrument, but it's an instrument that really helps with market liquidity. Right, so basically making sure that markets move is very, very freely. We've been a huge advocate of that. We were the architect of which is now the largest master agreement for cross-border repo trades, the GMRA. And so I think we'll continue to be instrumental in that space. And then finally, I think we will continue to set market best practice, right? We continue to create the documentation with the participation of the market that essentially sets out the standards, that establishes the standards, that establishes the best market practice. And hopefully in those type of areas, we've been around for, 6 decades now? Almost 6 decades. So we hope to continue to build, resilient, well-functioning global debt capital markets.
What if we take the synergy of the training and the marketing, put those two together? How has that helped specifically create a more, let's say, informed and efficient market?
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, as a marketing professional, I've come to believe, as I moved into marketing, because I didn't start there, I started in technology, but I've come to believe that there's a genuine benefit in marketing beyond just the return on investment and the growth that it drives. And particularly in the case of the ICMA, I think there's almost a public service aspect to be able to share and disseminate this information. Obviously, it's not for everyone, but for the sorts of audiences that we're talking about, it's really crucial. And I think that good marketing and communications best practices, if it sits inside an organization and sort of becomes part of that organization's infrastructure and culture, it makes that organization more efficient and more valuable to ultimately the customers and clients and world, in this case of ICMA, that it's trying to serve and develop.
And what about ICMA's long-term goals, and your path that you've laid out, with your team to achieving those goals? How does that look?
Well, look, I mean, as I say, our strategy has always been ultimately judged by how resilient and how the global debt capital markets function. And I think that, we have played an important part in the fact over the last almost 60 years in the expansion of those markets, and bringing in more frontier markets and more emerging markets into this sort of global debt market, sort of this environment. So I think our strategy will continue to promote and to prioritize that. And I think the other thing is that it's interesting that you talk about the importance of marketing to that. I completely agree. I think that one of the reasons that ICMA has lasted as long as it has is because we have always really prioritized relationships, right? And it will continue to be a priority. It's those personal face-to-face relationships, right? That is really what creates the community. It's those interpersonal relationships. It always comes back to people, right? It creates the community, and I think that the more people who become aware of what we do, and become aware of the importance of this networking community, and then they sort of feed into these relationships, and that just continues to grow. So I think it's a hugely important role.
Yeah, it's a really uplifting idea to think. I mean, both of us come from markets that are, on the face of it, can be really, really technical, and it's tempting to sort of look out into the future, particularly with the advent of AI, and just think about a world where our industries can almost operate in the absence of human beings, as we sort of touched on. But it does, I have to say, I feel really hopeful, and you're quite inspired, Marc, listening to you talk there, because you are right. At the heart of these things, in both, whether it's in the financial sector or whether it's in the marketing, digital marketing sector more generally, actually, you still need people to buy from people and people to assist those transactions to happen, because in the absence of those people, then I guess the whole thing becomes kind of meaningless.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. You know, we had our AGM and conference recently, a couple of weeks ago in Brussels, and I was on the train with one of our senior guys who's a senior market guy there, train back, and he's very focused on secondary markets, which is essentially the buying and selling of these instruments, and we're talking about the impact of AI on things like algorithm trading, right? So how is trading going to be impacted in the long term by AI? And it was an interesting conversation. I'm not a market guy, so listening to him, his thoughts was quite interesting. But ultimately, even him, this is a guy who's ex-Goldman Sachs, right? He very, very long distinguished career in the markets. He still believes it's still going to be a people-orientated thing. And I think that's really, really, it was encouraging for me to know that, some of the most enlightened people, or people the most experienced, I suppose, in these markets still believe in the primacy of humans within them. And I think that's really cool.
My final question actually was to both of you, how do you foresee the future of communication? And I'm very happy to hear it is still with actual conversations with actual humans. So that's really reassuring. Elliott, Marc, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you.